in the English language, if we selected those units and put them in patterns, we would call those patterns words, wouldn't we? And remember, there's all different types of words. There's nouns and verbs and adjectives and pronouns and prepositions and all this kind of stuff like this. Well, in music, we have our 12-unit alphabet. We select units out of it and form them into patterns, but we don't call them words. We call them things like chords and scales and melody and harmony and stuff like that. And that's what so much of this program is going to be about, is learning how to create these patterns. And I might have said last week that there's about 50 basic patterns, 50 different words in the musical language that you have to understand something about. And that's what most of this whole program is all about. So there you go. Huge things about pitch, the physics of pitch, and the first aesthetic question. How does it work as an art form? You have 12 notes in your alphabet. Okay, now, this stuff that we're going to cover right now, I always say, I think this is the most important stuff that you're ever going to learn from anybody on the subject of music. In some ways, this is the most important part of this entire program, what we're going to talk about now. And, once again, it's about pitch. And what do we know about pitch so far? Well, we know, for example, that we have 12 notes, and we're going to kind of think of this as our alphabet in the language of music. And over the next few hours, I've got to teach you how to form like 50 different patterns out of this 12-note alphabet. And these patterns are very much kind of like the words in the language. And they have spellings out of this 12-unit alphabet. As I mentioned before, when you're moving your fingers around on your guitar, you're typing these words out of this 12-note alphabet down there. So you've got to learn these 50 patterns. Just to control any language, you've got to have a vocabulary in the language. You've got to learn these 50 different patterns. If you're interested in how these 50 break down, by the way, I didn't quite leave myself enough room to write this up here. Here it is. Here's how the number 50 breaks down. There are 3 big categories of intervals that you have to know about. Chords, which I'm sure you've heard about, scales, which I'm sure you've heard about, and intervals, interestingly enough, is the third one. A lot of people haven't heard of those, which is kind of strange, again, because if you don't understand intervals, you'll never really understand scales and chords. And the number 50 breaks down something like this. You have 13 different intervals that you have to learn, 14 different scales that you have to learn, and somewhere in the vicinity of about 20 different chords that you have to learn to play popular music. Remember, that's the promise I make everyone around here. We're not going to stuff your head full of a bunch of dumb junk that you don't need to know. This is just about pop music. That's what most of you are interested in. If you wanted to play classical music or jazz, the more complex styles of music, you would have to know all this stuff anyway. But for example, then that number 50, I'd say you'd about have to triple that. To play any style of music, you have to know about 150 different patterns. And we're going to look at a lot of those just basically, but there is a core group of these 50 different patterns that you have to know in order to get yourself started, in order to understand basic popular music. So you've got to learn these 50 different patterns. But, and here's the big stuff coming right now. One thing you've got to understand is each one of these patterns exists like simultaneously in like 4 different dimensions. Each one of these patterns has 4 different aspects, 4 different faces, and you need to learn to recognize it no matter which of its 4 faces it shows you. So what I always say is there are 4 ways to know each pitch pattern, and this is a hugely misunderstood thing in music. But this will, if you understand this, this will set the tone for the whole rest of your musical career. This, in a sense, is all you have to do. You've got to learn these 50 different patterns, and you have to learn each one 4 different ways. You want to know the really cool thing about this is, once again, this is not weird, abstract, alien information that you don't know anything about, because I'm going to suggest that you know every single one of your patterns in the English language the same 4 ways. This is not just specific to music. This is how you use your words in any language. And if you look at it that way, this will help you understand music, because you can look at music exactly the way you look at any language you speak. And mostly we're talking about English here, aren't we? you know every word in the English language these same 4 ways, and if you visualize it that way, it'll help you kind of understand how music works, and you'll be able to really just zip through this stuff and really understand what I'm talking about. Now, most of our friends only know their patterns like one way, which I'm going to suggest is kind of like completely a dead end, and if they know their patterns at all, it's usually this way down here, number 4, but we're going to start up at the top here. This is kind of the linchpin. All the other ones will start to work if you basically understand this one up here. And here we go. This might be the most important stuff you ever learn about music. You have to know each pattern 4 ways. Think of any word you know in the English language, and I'm going to suggest that the first way that you know any word in any language is you have it in your mind. You are able to think in the language. Isn't that true? The only way that I'm able to speak to you right now is because I already have all these words in my mind, right? These words aren't just flying out of my mouth. I'm constructing these sentences in my head, and then I am speaking them. You have to have the language in your mind first before you can do anything with it, right? Now, in a musical context, let's say this then. The first way you have to know your chords and your scales and your intervals is you have to have them in your mind. Remember, my great quote is, you don't play the guitar with your fingers, you play it with your head. You play it with your mind. The finger stuff is just the typing stuff. So the first way that you need to understand your pitch patterns is you need to understand them as concepts. That's the first way. You have to be able to think in the language. You have to know your pitch patterns as concepts. This is the whole world of music theory. Now, this is a word that strikes terror in a lot of people's hearts. They've tried to take music theory classes at school. They've tried to read books, and oh my God, this stuff is really confusing and complicated, and it just isn't. It's just, music, as you're going to hear me say, is the worst taught subject of all times. Are you having any trouble understanding what I'm saying so far in lesson number 1 and in this lesson? I hope not. If you're not, then you're probably not going to have any problem with any of this. It doesn't get any harder than this. It's just usually they explain music in the wrong order. That's, I think, what I've figured out, and hopefully I'm giving it to you in the right order. Now, nonetheless, a lot of people try to avoid learning their music theory because this is the part that's a little bit like school, you know what I mean? You're going to have to spend some time, and it's not necessarily going to be the most fun part of your career. You're going to have to spend some time, and you're going to have to memorize some stuff that's very much like spelling and vocabulary and stuff like that. People go, oh no, am I really going to have to do this? And the answer is yes. If you want to satisfy yourself, you're just going to have to do a little bit of work. Remember, it's only 50 lousy words. The alphabet only has 12 units in it. What's the big deal? You know what I mean? If you just resign yourself to doing a little bit of school type work, the benefits will be there. Now, long before they could teach you any words in a language, they have to make sure that you know the alphabet. So the first thing that you've got to do in any language is you have to make sure that you know the alphabet. So let's check in with that for a moment. You know now that the musical alphabet has 12 units in it. What are those units called? A lot of you probably have a lot of kind of confusion about that too. Let's get that nailed down once and for all. Hi, I'm Scotty West, creator of the Absolutely Understand Guitar Video Home Study Program. Hey, thanks for all the positive feedback on our video guitar lessons. We're now uploading new lessons right from our DVD Home Study Program. Each lesson is 70 minutes long, but we've chopped them up into 10-minute chapters to fit on YouTube, so each lesson will have 7 chapters. It's critical that you watch these chapters in order. Make sure you start with Lesson 1, Chapter 1, then move to Lesson 1, Chapter 2, etc. When you've finished all the chapters for Lesson 1, then move on to Lesson 2. Hey, some of this stuff you might already know, and some of it's a little dry. You're going to wonder, do I really need to know this stuff? The answer is yes. Each one of these chapters contains little gems of information that nobody's told you yet, and these are the missing pieces that are preventing you from seeing the big picture. Don't cheat yourself out of these valuable realizations. Stick with the program. Also, consider our complete DVD home study program. Our high-resolution DVD video is much better than these fuzzy little YouTube clips, and you'll also get all our cool printed material, too. So good luck with your music and enjoy the lessons.